be a relatively straightforward meeting. There is effectively only one substantive paper, but we will see how we go. So can we start with item 1, which is membership and membership update? Bruce, you were saying to me earlier that we are quite anxious to get somebody from early years, an early years representative.
Yes. Unfortunately, Elaine, the previous rep, had to resign from position because she moved from a role in Northumberland to a new position in North Tyneside. Obviously, in terms of early years representation, that's something we're keen to see carried out. We've spoken to David, and we will use the network to hopefully fill that role appropriately. Okay.
If people are anxious to commit the time, I'm thinking as I'm going here, this may not make an awful lot of sense, but could we have a small group of people, 2, 3 who could alternate? Would that make any sense if it would get some representation here? Because I think it's very important.
I think you'd have one nominated representative, but then they could substitute for that person on a, as required if they were unable to attend consistently or wanted to share the workload. I think it's probably worth saying as well, and it's just a question of reminding people. And Michelle, I look to you in relation to this, in case we're not, fulfilling the public nature of the schools forum. We are sort of broadcasting this meeting as live to fulfil that public function. When we met last time, I think there's actually a groundswell of opinion that meeting remotely like this is quite helpful in terms of reducing that travelling time and the need across Northumberland. So while we're only empowered by legislation to meet remotely until the 31st of March, that's something that government may be looking at again anyway in the current climate.
Yeah, can't see anything changing quickly. Okay, thanks for that, Bruce. Audrey, your hand is up.
Good morning, Chair. It was just a quickie to say that I'll pick up with David around a primary representative. I'm sure that we can look around. We've got sufficient around the county to be able to find someone and develop them into this role. So we'll pick that up for you.
Smashing. I'm very encouraged by that, and I love your background.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anything further on membership, Bruce?
No, not at this point. We'll provide a few review to the July meeting as per the work programme.
Okay. Apologies for absence. Michelle, have you got any information on that?
Be Kay.
Kay, sorry.
It's Kay. Faye Hartland submitted her apologies. Guy Renner Thompson is unable to come today, and Nicola Taylor.
Right. Okay. Do we have any more apologies that anyone is aware of? Okay, thanks for that, Kay. Disclosure of interest. Anyone to report anything under item 3?
Sorry, just picking up on apologies, Colin. It's probably worth mentioning we did hear from Alan Hardy, NCEA. He is attending, but may be late.
Okay.
Because he has a clash.
Okay. Can I ask again then, any disclosure of interest? I'll take that as a no. There's a hand up. Richard?
The one item in the last agenda item that refers to training facility on that, when we get to that particular point, I'll remain silent.
Okay. Your connection is very ropey, Richard.
Just picking that up, Richard, it will only be the maintained school members essentially who will be voting on the sort of de-delegated funding around the trade union facility time. So yeah, I appreciate what you're saying.
Right, Audrey, is that AK? Audrey, is that your hand still up? Yeah, smashing. Okay, sorry about this. We'll get more efficient as I go on. Can we move to item 4 minutes and matters arising? And I'm assuming everybody's got a copy with them or on screen. Can I take matters arising and matters of accuracy all at the same time on page 1? Page 2. Page 3.
Yes, Chair, just one.
Okay, Graham.
The old chestnut again, 69.1. Any
Yeah.
further uptake of a bright trade?
Audrey, or
Do you want me to come in there, Simon?
yeah, okay, that's Sue. Yeah.
Yeah, just to say, Graham, there's been no further update, but I think, as was mentioned at the previous meeting, the Councillor Guy Renner-Thompson is still pursuing that with the Department of Education.
Okay, it's not forgotten anyway.
No.
Okay, with that, Graham.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, moving on then for the rest of page 3 into page 4. Okay. In page 5. Into page 6. Okay, page 7. Page 8. This is all going to be discussed in the substantive agenda. Page 9. And page 10. We have the work programme on the agenda anyway. So can I assume there are no matters arising? Everyone content with the minutes? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. And moving into communication.
Thanks, Colin. Yes, there's a couple of items I'll just share on screen just to highlight. They're in the papers anyway. The previous minutes, I think it was 70.2, referred to the F40 papers we've shared previously around. Sorry, we'll do the DFE statement first. In terms of the November paper, I was referring to the settlement figures we were still awaiting for and we received in late December. That's obviously the headline publication that was made by the DFE. Again, I'm not going to comment or get into the individual details in terms of the statements. In terms of the position for Northumberland, we obviously have more detail on agenda item 6, but I thought it was worth sharing just the DFE view, if you like, in respect of that.
Yes, thank you for that. Anybody want to make any comment on that? It's for information only. Okay, Bruce, then the F40 paper.
Yes, again, we received a request from F40 late in December. I think it was the 22nd. Members may recall that essentially we highlighted the F40 paper that had gone to the DFE around prior to Christmas at the November meeting about the additional costs arising from COVID-19. And what we've essentially done is receive a request from F40 if anyone is able to or willing to share any individual examples, both, and again, some examples they're highlighting there is around PPE costs and other costs to send schools. I think that's a key one, impact on teacher absences and schools' ability to cope through COVID, you know, both obviously through illness, but also needing to self-isolate, and the subsequent impact I'm guessing on supply teachers' costs. You know, there is a plea there from F40, please don't send everything to us, but if there are any schools looking who are willing and able to share some examples, I'm sure that either myself or Abby, working with the mainstream school team she works with, would be happy to work with schools and sort of shape that information for the F40 if anybody was interested in participating in that request for help.
Bruce, that's a very generous offer. That was in the back of my mind, and I didn't know whether to put you on the spot with that. But I think if you could act as a conduit, that would be very helpful, and would encourage people to, you know, perhaps make a contribution where they may not do it otherwise. I mean, it's a personal opinion. I hope it's shared by people. I find the representations of the F40 very, very helpful. So I would encourage schools to consider that seriously, particularly in the current environment. There's probably a lot of valuable information held there that you know, could be made available. So Bruce, to contributions to you, or Abby possibly.
Yes, I mean, I've been out meeting schools doing the indicative budget visits, so I'll speak to my team, because I'm sure they'll know specific schools who've been struggling and have really taken a hit with the impact of COVID. So yeah, we'll contact a few of those and see if we can get some examples.
That would be even better, Debbie, if you would initiate that. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Debbie has a hand.
Sorry, Abby.
Wiley?
Yeah. I said Debbie there because the name's just come up on my screen. Sorry about that, Abby. Debbie?
No. Hi everyone. Yeah, I've got a quick question about that. I know what the guidance says that we're allowed to claim, but there's actually a couple of things that we've spent on which are not in the guidance as claimable, and we've had them refused, but it has enabled us to stay pretty COVID free throughout school for the whole of last term, and to bring children back early right across school in the summer term. So it's had a really positive impact, the choices that we've made in terms of expenditure. Is it worth me sharing that as well, or is it just things that are on the guidelines that are claimable?
No, I mean, obviously, members may recall that the key DFE guidance was essentially that additional costs were initially refunded to only schools who were going to make a deficit this year and couldn't fund from an increased reserve, and it was specifically around free school meals, premises and cleaning. I think, as you're aware, and is suggested in the F40 memo, that there are areas which do not fall strictly within those categories, which schools have nevertheless incurred additional expenditure on. And Debbie, it sounds as if you've got a key example of that. So yes, indeed, that would be great. And if you want to share that information with me, I'm more than happy to share it if you want to have that discussion.
I think it's possibly even more important that we make representation about things that are not quite so obvious. So please do that, Debbie.
Okay, thank you.
Audrey, is that your hand up?
It is, Chair. It was just a quickie, and actually you've just said it. One of the things I talked to Bruce and Sue about from the F40 paper was, you know, could we encourage some examples across the county, because the only way that we can get policy and guidance to be informed by what is actually working on the ground is to demonstrate that with evidence. Yeah. And so really getting that evidence is super key. So I think that's a really good example, Debbie. If we could have that and you'd be willing to share it, that would be something that would be really very much welcomed.
Okay, thank you. Thank
you both for that. Okay, Bruce, anything else you want to say about that F40 paper?
No. Again, if there's, it's been suggested, if Debbie, if you want to share that information with me outside of the meeting, and Abby will work with her team if there are any further examples. I just need to highlight there is a relatively tight deadline on that. We need to make submissions by Friday, the 22nd of January. So it's a bit of work that needs to be done over the next few days, realistically. Okay, thank you for that. And again, thank you, Abby, for volunteering to coordinate that. Moving on then to probably the substantive paper of this agenda, item 6, the dedicated schools grant. And back to you, Bruce. Okay, thanks, Colin. Just so everybody, if we work through this sort of paper, I'll share on screen so we can just work through it consistently at the same time, if that helps. I'll start from page 1 rather than page 10. Obviously, this is following on from the report that we received to the November meeting. As highlighted in the DFE statement, we received our budget settlement on the 17th of December. A report went to Cabinet as outlined in November, sharing the key principles and results of the schools consultation in relation to the proposals and the direction of travel in relation to proposals for next year. The figure we received through in terms of the headline figure was some £203 million, which again sounds as if it's significantly higher than the previous year's figures, and again it's obviously £16 million higher. As I said at the November meeting, I need to stress that the schools need to be careful, because what is rolled in this year is the teachers paying pension grants. What I highlight is the TPPG funding, which was historically paid as a separate specific grant. Now, in principle, the idea that schools receive this money as part of their overall block grant where they have greater freedom to spend it is in theory a good thing. But I know Abby's done a lot of work with her team identifying that the grants allocated hopefully cover costs, the actual costs which schools have incurred in respect of that. But that's why that accounts for more than half of the increase, if you like. What that then means is essentially there's a like-for-like increase, if you like, of 7 million or 3.8%. That doesn't mean all of our schools are getting a 3.8% increase across the country. That increase is differentiated again according to the outcomes of the funding formula. One of the key influences in that is the increase in the minimum per pupil funding. Again, as briefed at the November meeting, members will recall that there's a larger increase of some 6% to the minimum per pupil funding in primary to bring it up to a previous level of £4,000 before later adjustments. And that, again, has had an impact on how funding is distributed or will be distributed for 21-22. There is no discretion or flexibility in that. And that accounts for probably the single major most significant factor within the formula this year. Again, overall DSG allocations are shown there before any recoupment and deductions. Obviously, there's more details available at Annex 1. Another key sort of headlines in terms of the figures that we have a decrease of 55 in overall pupil numbers, and there is a shift in pupils from primary to secondary this year. We're also evident within the figures that there is increases in deprivation funding due to increased primary secondary numbers attracting free school meals, and also as a result of the new EDACI formulas being introduced. The EDACI, the Index of Deprivation Affecting Children Index, essentially had their data reviewed in 2019, and 21-22 was the first year in which the updated data has been used, if you like.
Bruce, can I just ask about the shift in pupil numbers? I think we're all aware of this, but has County sort of looked at the trend and projected that forward and thought about, the impact over the next few years that may have?
I mean, that pupil planning is part of, is part of County's planning, part of function. I don't know whether or not Sue wants to say anything specific around that, but we're looking at projections for up to 6 years in advance. Okay. Modelling pupil projections. I think the difficult thing in there is always around parental preference. Yeah.
Sue?
Yes, Colin, thank you. Yeah, we do, although it's not a statutory responsibility of the local authority any longer, we still do a school organisation plan, and we're just refreshing that at the moment. We are a little bit behind because of obviously the things we've been doing to support the COVID response, but we will be bringing a report to the March Facts Committee that will update all of our predictions across the whole of Northumberland and in detail across each of the partnerships. And as Bruce rightly said, that's why school organisation and resources sit together. All of our pupil planning and predictions feed into the work that we do around the resources element, which obviously means school funding. So yeah, it is very much a joined up process across my team.
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to share that, obviously, with Schools Forum members once we've completed the document and it's out for consultation again.
Yeah, so that would be a very interesting document for information. So yes, please, if you would share that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bruce, again.
Okay, yeah. Again, section 4, outlining the consultation with schools, again, as shared and drafted with the previous forum meeting. I think, again, we asked 4 questions as previously outlined. We did amend and provide some additional supporting information as was requested by forum. I think, obviously, the overall number of responses was disappointing, but I think it reflects, again, implicit agreement, as we see in terms of the report. And I think, again, there is a mandate to, the proposals we consulted on with Schools Forum and Schools Forum agreed at the last meeting. The only essential discussion the only question where there was some variation was essentially around the use of MFG and at what level. Again, there were some differences of opinion, but I think, as we've said in the report, in the absence of a strong view of the country, to the contrary, should I say, the idea that we're trying to support all our schools to the maximum extent possible and set that maximum 2% increase, remains a sound one.
I think that's a good interpretation, Bruce. That that lack of actual comment is actually quite a positive thing. I think I would read that as general agreement.
Okay. Moving on, section 5. I mean, we didn't have any early years figures as at the November meeting. There are no provisional figures published for early years as there is in relation to the early block. So again, it's the first sight of those figures. There is a modest increase in the early years figures overall, but again, the figure we received in late December is a provisional one. Forum may recall that the early years allocation are essentially based on the January census, as at averaged over 2 years. So while we have an indicative figure based on January 2020, those figures will be further revised in light of January 21 and subsequently January 22 information on a rolling basis, if you like. Moving on again, overall high needs block figures. Again, the overall figures are as shared in the report. In relation to, there are sort of significant levels of recoupment that come off in relation to both import-export adjustments and places at other providers such as sort of academies, FE and the such like, and we account for them in more detail in Annex A. Again, I think there is still work to be done around the high needs budget. We have met as a team to try to set a budget for next year, but it remains, particularly challenging circumstances. We're also mindful in terms of medium term that we need to set aside sufficient provision for the new free school, which opens in September 2022. The new SEN free school in 2022. So again, it's how we manage that on a medium term basis. In line with the final recommendation at the bottom there, we will bring a more detailed high needs budget back to the next meeting on the 24th of February, if again members are in agreement with that.
Okay, anybody want to comment on that section of the paper or the recommendation 1? Can I take that as agreement to recommendation 1? Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving down again, details of how the schools block is calculated based on the primary units of funding and a little bit of historical information in as a result of that. Again, bearing in mind that that figure for the first time in 21-22 includes the teachers' pay and pension grant funding, so isn't directly comparable. But we receive a total schools block allocation of £203.1 million. The maximum transfer, essentially, the mathematically shrewd amongst us will point out the fact that £970,000 isn't 0.5% of the total 203 million figure. That's essentially after the teachers' pay and pensions grant element is accounted for, because, you know, quite rightly, that's essentially allocated in its entirety directly to schools. So the actual figure is slightly less than 0.5% of the total amount. As is evident in the, you know, the figures, again, just highlighting the 202.1 million less the 1 million essentially gives us a figure of 202.1 million. The projections we brought to Schools Forum in November looked at allocating a total of £201.8 million. Essentially, the work we're doing in the background now, before submission to the ESFA on the 21st of February, is just look at how to correctly and most appropriately apportion and account for that balance. That, you know, that essentially that £340,000 worth of funding, you know, to benefit the maximum number of schools in line with the principles and strategy we've set around moving towards the national funding formula. Again, we're setting a 2% MFG as outlined previously. We haven't made any specific disapplication requests in relation to 21-22 school funding, but we did, as outlined in November, we're maintaining the funding to the schools who received additional sparsity based on road distance criteria and didn't qualify via the as the crow flies. And again, we fervently hope that that's something, as the SFA have indicated they may do, we'll look at in advance of 22-23. Okay. Again, last year we set aside a growth fund to deal with, you know, sort of pupil movement arising from either reorganisation or other school moves and changes. Rather than allocating and guessing, dare I say it, at the point some 9 months before, that gives us the flexibility then to identify after admissions are closed where pupils are attending and allocate funding accordingly. We haven't had to draw on that this year, but we would propose to continue to take that forward, so it gives us that flexibility in future years. We're not anticipating asking for an additional contribution to the fund at this stage for 21-22, and again, as we'll bring further information as to the use of the growth fund to the Schools Forum as and when we then decide to draw that down.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Again, finally, and again, obviously the previous reports saw delegated powers to deal with the very tight timescales we get between the receipt of the funding information in late December, the need to go to Cabinet and then return to the SFA by the 21st of January. Again, that's essentially where we are in relation to that process. From a school's perspective, I think it's probably worth pointing out that the deadline for confirming schools' budget shares is the 28th of February. Our next forum meeting is the 24th of February, so we'll get information out as soon as possible, you know, following that forum. Just because we appreciate even those 2 or 3 days can be helpful and beneficial to schools in, you know, planning budgets for next year. I mean, again, you know, we don't anticipate wholesale changes to the proposals we've shared previously and have been outlined in terms of values in those tables, but we're just sort of, you know, dealing with that residual piece of funding now. Okay. Okay. And
that is, sorry, I'm behind the curve here. That paragraph, that's the standard method of approving that we've used in previous years, Bruce. There's nothing any different there.
It is, Colin. That's the standard procedure, and it's the most efficient and, dare I say, practical and pragmatic approach we can take given timescales. You know, and again, given, you know, the report to Cabinet yesterday.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So again, table 1. What we have there in column E are the proposed formula values. They're unchanged as per the November paper. As I say, we may just need to look at final values where we remain out of line, and we will look at maybe sort of free school meals and also look at the level of capping and scaling in relation to sort of making that final decision around the funding, allocating that residual funding, and we'll bring back any final decision to obviously next forums meeting. But again, as we've allocated, the modelling we've done has been pretty accurate, I think.
Yeah, very good.
Okay. Dedelegation, again, important that we sort of highlight this. Schools will be aware that certain services can have funding centrally retained by the dedelegation of funding with the agreement of main schools representatives on schools forum. Academies, those services remain available to academies, but essentially because they haven't had funding retained in relation to it, they then need to buy in or purchase services on a SLA or a pay-as-you-go basis. Whereas historically there's been 5 services received a contribution through dedelegation, the 4 highlighted in the table, and also behaviour support. The issue around the behaviour support in light of the new Northumberland Inclusive Education Services model, where essentially services are free at the point of delivery according to need, and and are triaged appropriately at that point. That the dedelegated funding coming directly from main schools doesn't really work in respect of that. It would seem far more appropriate that that funding with the key links to SEN is funded via the high needs block, so that both maintained schools and academies can also access those services appropriately on an equal footing. So we've removed the behaviour support of dedelegated funding this year and proposing to move that to the high needs block instead, and clearly we'll bring further information on that when we bring back the high needs budget in February. So that leaves us essentially requesting dedelegated funding in respect of the remaining of 4 services. We've provided an estimated amount there which will remain accurate. I think the important thing to say, as in certainly the past 2 or 3 previous years, we've retained the per pupil contribution at the same level as in previous years, mindful of the impact on schools. So essentially we're seeking the approval of our maintained schools in respect of the £20 per pupil contribution in respect of the contingency fund, the funding for the determination of free schools eligibility, and again I think the previous 12 months have proved the value of that service. Again, trades union facility time, and last but not least the contribution drawn specifically from the formula element relating to those students for whom English is an additional language, as opposed to against the full sort of student population, and taking a contribution in respect of that.
In terms of the recommendation, just to make clear that this has to be approved by representatives of the appropriate phase, but can I suggest that I simply ask, does anyone have any comments or objections to the recommendation at number 2, bearing in mind that they are representing mainstream schools and their particular phase? Keith?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the amount for trades union facility time will depend very much on how it's reported and how it's accounted for. For when I worked as a trades union rep, if somebody didn't fill in the correct form properly to account for it within Public Health England, then it wasn't counted as trades union facility time. So I'd say that that unless you get good, accurate reporting of the amount of time that people are using, then the chances are that that notional amount will be different. But given that it's a notional amount, I don't think it really matters too much to the overall scheme of things, because I'm not sure how it appears in the accounts later on.
Christina, thanks for that, Keith. Christina?
Yeah. In response to that, I actually manage and oversee that budget, and we have a much more robust process in place now, with things being agreed on an annual basis, because individuals are often on day release from their current day job, to allow them to be able to accommodate the time in other schools. Very few individuals are on timesheets, so are actually able to monitor, manage and predict the budget a lot more closely. We also have quite a robust process in that if individuals don't claim the time, then we will have conversations with them if they don't fill forms in appropriately. So it's a lot more stringent than may have been there before. And we use previous models that we use in other local authorities to kind of mirror the process. So I am confident that where we actually get the money, we're absolutely able to account for it. Trade union colleagues are able to allocate the time, and also we are one of the local authorities who report back at a national level on trade union facility time, as well as part of the government thing that we are required to do. So we have got some catch up from previous years that we're working through in this year, because we have only been managing it more closely for the last 12 or 18 months. But my intention is in Schools Forum going forward, you will get a periodic report to be able to see how the SLA works in a little bit more detail, and to explain it, to give you the confidence that it is working quite clearly and the money is actually being spent on behalf of schools.
Okay, thank you for that, Christina. Keith, anything further you want to say? Thank you for raising that point.
Yeah, I am reassured by that answer, and I look forward to seeing how it's been used. And I think it is important that it is accounted for accurately. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. Richard Woolhouse, any comment on that? Okay, I'll take that as no. Bruce?
Just one point. It's probably worth making at this point as well, because it's the mainstream maintained schools. We obviously, well, as we've said previously, as I said earlier, the academies are clearly able to buy in at the same rate as our maintained schools. That's something that also applies to our special schools as well, because obviously the special schools don't have the same national funding formula applied to them, and a number of our a lot of our special schools do. It's worth highlighting that. Okay,
so recommendation 2, I'm going to take silence as acceptance. Is that okay? I'll leave things for a few seconds so you can comment.
All in favour?
Oh, got Richard back again. Richard.
Sorry, I was cut off for no apparent reason.
Okay.
No. So, we're providing a useful service, but clearly I would want to say that anyway, wouldn't I?
Okay. Anything more, Richard? I can't hear you. This is difficult.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we'll just leave that at the moment. Richard, if you can hear me, can you put is a facility on Teams for a written comment?
Yes, I've just added a comment to Richard stating that he was breaking up a bit. The speech bubble box at the top in the bar. There is the opportunity for Richard to add something there if he feels the need. I'm sure he would be in support of the overall agreement of schools anyway.
I'm making that assumption, but I'll leave that option open to Richard until the end of the meeting. Oh dear.
Okay.
Okay, can we move on, Bruce?
Yeah, of course. Central School Services block, again, newly created, split into 2 parts: funding for ongoing statutory responsibilities and a cash sum for historic commitments. The figure we were subsequently notified of is higher by some £130,000 than the original provisional allocation. Members may recall that we made representation to the ESFA that the amount allocated for the historic commitments no longer met the very commitments it was supposed to cover in respect of historic capital commitments and also enhanced employment and historic pensions costs. Thankfully, the SFA listened to the representations and we received, I think, another £130,000 through in respect of that. See, there isn't the same growth in that block. It remains challenging, and the ongoing unwinding of the historic commitments remains a concern. But as in, last year, we will continue to monitor and manage that.
But the little bit of good news, Bruce, is that your representations were effective.
Well, again, it was a joint effort, and Abby certainly provided some information which was helpful from the historic angle as well. So,
very good. Thank you for that.
Okay. Again, that's the final substantive part. We then essentially have the grant on a page, if you like, attached to Annex 1. Essentially, that sets out the figures that we've already been through in parts of the report. I'm happy to take any individual questions or queries. Essentially, that's the bottom line figure. You will see a DFE published figure of 264 million, which is essentially includes all of the deductions made by the ESFA from the high needs block, with the exception of import-export. Well, it's treated differently as one, specifically for the ESFA, but that's clearly online now. It's just a question of assisting anybody should they be looking at the information subsequently shared by the ESFA. We also have a breakdown of the rates in relation to the eligible pupil funding and the dedelegation calculation there as well.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Any questions on Annex 1? And anything further on the paper as a whole? Richard?
If you can hear me now, I was
much better. Yeah,
eminently content with the facility time bit. Just a question really, because I don't have Katie around to keep me straight on this early years stuff. But reading in our paper, it's talking about nurseries being potentially and early years being in real trouble next year. And it occurred to me when we looked at item 5 that if the numbers are based on next year's money be based on this year's number of students, is COVID having an impact on the numbers who are actually there, and therefore will it be causing problems for us next year?
This, apart from anything else, sounds, Bruce and Abby, like a point to make on response to that F40 paper. But yes, Bruce, anything you can add to that?
I think it's important to say in relation to the current year that for the autumn term, certainly we supported nursery providers on the basis of either their actual attendance or the historic attendance from the previous, from 12 months previously. I think obviously there continues to be, and essentially we've received funding at broadly the same level as we did for 2021. I think, again, given the concerns and given the sort of focus around nurseries at the moment, it's something we'll continue to keep under, keep under scrutiny and try to support nurseries as best we can. I see Audrey's got a hand up. It's unfortunate David's not here this morning.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure who came first. I saw Mike first. Can we take Mike next? Mike Dean Hall.
Thank you. Yep. Just to add a little voice, I don't know whether Audrey's got something back from there. We've had a bit going backwards and forwards with David, just to confirm how the funding is going to work for particularly school-based nurseries, and it has been well supported by county in terms of looking at historic numbers over the course of the year. But obviously, there's been a catastrophic hole in nursery funding from fees that don't come through the funded places, so private fees and wraparound care and so forth. And there is a significant worry, certainly I've got here, and I know colleagues around me in neighbouring first schools who've got running nursery positions as well, that is if it gets funded in terms of actual pupil attending at the moment, there's going to be a huge problem in terms of viability. I know David has reassured us to a degree, and Audrey may have more on that, that they're going to try and fund it at the levels we would normally be operating at, so that these provisions are still here once we come out the end of the lockdown and the pandemic. Thank you.
Yeah, very good point. Audrey, can you add something to that?
Yes, Chair, just to confirm exactly what Bruce and Mike have said. So David confirmed just last week that we will take the plan numbers. There's also a census due, I think, later this month for early years, which is about then projecting forward for future funding on a lagged model. So we will take the modelled numbers and we will support clearly where they're funded places, then we'll continue to support that. We understand the COVID challenges, Richard, are particularly around capacity, whether or not there are staff shielding in nurseries, and does that then limit some of the numbers that nurseries are able to take at any particular point. So we may have a real challenge around potentially having to double fund on a short term, because if for example, a parent chooses to take a child to another nursery to be able to access that place, then that place, the money follows the child in terms of that. But we will, and we have committed to ensuring that the numbers are stable and the funding is stable for planning for our nurseries moving forward.
Okay, thank you for that, Audrey. Debbie? Debbie, your hand is up. No, maybe.
Sorry. I'm just. I just wanted to ask about the coming back at the private provider option. Is there any indication in terms of the overall supply across county of which private providers are still sustaining themselves through these difficult times, and whether any private providers aren't able to help? I know that on our school site we do have private provider, and I have a very arm's length connection with that, so I'm not sure whether I would be possibly conflicted from asking the question, but I'm just conscious it's very challenging at the moment right across the board. It's not just school settings, but privates as well. And bearing in mind we don't currently have an early years representative, I just felt the need to ask that question, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. Just Audrey, before you reply, I don't know if this is partly what Debbie is getting at, but one of the things that was going through my mind was the difficulties with wraparound care, which is often provided by private carers before school and after school. So maybe add something there.
We do have a full picture. I don't have it at my fingertips, Chair, but we do have a full picture of those who are currently operating and the attendance across the places that are available, and where we have some pinch points currently. But Mike's absolutely right. We're almost at a year now of the global pandemic and the challenges that are associated with it, and particularly I think private nurseries and childminders have been hard hit. If for example one child has to isolate, then from a childminder's perspective, then that closes down their bubble in terms of the overall, so they're unable to operate. And if that's private fee providing, then they lose an income in terms of that. We had some support available through the short-term business grant as a result of COVID impact prior to Christmas, and we're just working on that again at the moment. But the early years team have got a full picture of what is currently operational and what's available in terms of places and open and safe.
Okay, this, like so much at the moment, is obviously a dynamic situation. I don't want to put you, Audrey, under unreasonable pressure, but I wonder if members would welcome some kind of statement, brief update at the next meeting about the particular challenges of early years.
Yeah, I've got no problem with that, Chair. We can make sure that's ready.
Smashing. Okay, thank you. Richard?
No, Richard's hand's down now, I think.
His hand's down. Okay. Richard, can I say thank you? You, as ever, you have your finger on the pulse. So thank you very much for raising that.
Colin, could I did put my hand down. It's Mike Deanhall, down it up again. I don't know if you've seen it. Just to come back in a little bit on there and back really to Audrey to say that appreciate any way you do it. I'm obviously representing a school-based nursery provision within one of my schools, and I know there's a different funding stream, and I had a couple of conversations about this, that the private settings obviously are able to access or have been able to access grants or cash amounts as a business that schools haven't been able to access. So that I think there are some unique problems to each side of the coin of the private settings and the school settings that we'll need looking at maybe slightly differently individually to see what the problems are, because I think they're slightly different, even though there's difficulty across the entirety of the early years in terms of nursery and childcare. There are different issues, I think, facing private settings versus schools, and there's just issues on both sides. That was all. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very good point. Audrey?
Just Chair, to say that I think what I'll make sure I do is I'll work with the team to make sure you get all of those different aspects covered, and then it brings Schools Forum kind of up to speed with the current challenges. I mean, I guess who knows, we're another month away, and what will happen in another month. I'm expecting some more challenges coming over the horizon for the primary sector very shortly, but we'll certainly make sure that we try and cover everything in that report so everyone's fully informed.
Thank you for that. Is that Buzz Richard? I'm not sure.
No,
no, I think we're good.
No, okay. Thank you, Richard, for raising that, and Mike and Debbie for your comments. That's very helpful, and thank you, Audrey, for agreeing to come back to us. Okay, can I then? I can't remember where I was before Richard raised that point, but can I ask for your endorsement of the paper on the DSG as Bruce has put it forward?
Again, it's specifically around those, acceptance of the recommendations in the absence of any comments to the contrary, around receiving the detail to the next meeting, but specifically around the de-delegated amounts as well. We've tried to demonstrate how we've reduced the overall demand in terms of de-delegation, and what we maintain members are all in line with that. Okay,
we've regarded agreement is already there for recommendation 1, and I think we now, in the absence of any further comment, accept recommendation 2 on de-delegation as well, Bruce.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Right. Item 7, the work programme. Well, the meeting date, the next meeting is going to be equally crucial. Is there anything further, Bruce, you want to say about the work programme?
I think the only thing is just to check that members do have the forward planner dates in their individual diaries, given that we're working across different technologies and such like. So, again, we've got meeting dates now for the remainder of the year. The next meeting falls a week later than had originally been anticipated because of the way half terms fall. Yeah. So it's Wednesday, the 24th of February. And I can say with almost complete assurance, I'm guessing we'll still be virtual at that stage.
Thank you. I'm sure we will. Okay. Any other points on the work programme? Okay. Any other business? Bruce, High Needs and Graham, High Needs Committee meeting, 27th of January.
Yes. Again, just checking if members have that. Respective members have that in their diary. We had a very lively, interesting debate before Christmas, and we'll hopefully continue productively in that vein.
Thank you. I have no items of any other business. Anyone wish to ask to raise anything? No? Okay. Then we look forward to the High Needs Committee meeting on the 27th of January and the next Full Schools Forum meeting on the 24th of February. And thank you all very much. I think in the circumstances that was a very good and worthwhile meeting. So thank you all.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye-bye. Thank you.